Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me for today's live discussion on domestic violence. I'm Kathy Anderson, and I write about domestic violence and healthcare for the Sacramento Bee. Today, we're going to discuss a key warning sign that victims of domestic violence might be killed by their partners. For this discussion, we have asked readers to submit questions. If you were not able to submit your questions beforehand, not to worry. We will also be taking questions during this live event. We'll take those from Facebook or YouTube, and we will do our best to cover as many of your questions as possible toward the end of today's discussions. If you want to come back and watch this discussion, it will be posted at sacb.com, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Did you know that if a woman is strangled even once by her partner, that she is 7.5 times more likely to be subsequently killed by him? I didn't learn this statistic until last year, and when I did, I knew I had to spread the word. I have written 3 articles on strangulation and stranglers. I hope you saw the 2 most recent articles. When will domestic violence turn fatal? California researchers found common threads in killings, and what drives men to strangle and then kill women? Here's what California counselors say. My editors at the Bee thought this was such an important topic that they have lowered our paywall on these articles to ensure everyone has access. That's right, you can read this important information at no cost. While men, women, and transgender people can all be victims of domestic violence, experts have found that strangulation in domestic violence cases is most likely to end in death or subsequent homicide when it involves a man strangling a woman. Strangulation, it seems, is indeed a dress rehearsal for homicide. I expected to be joined here today by 3 experts, but Matt Huckabee, over at the executive director over at the Center for Violence-Free Relationships in Placerville, is not able to be here because of a family emergency. We do have Joyce Blue, deputy director of the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center, and Don Blade, assistant chief deputy district attorney with the Sacramento District Attorney's Office, Sex Crimes and Family Violence Bureau. I'm very excited to have you both, and I know that you'll do a wonderful job. Before we dive into this discussion, I wanted to let victims in the Sacramento region know that support is available through Weave Inc. at 916-920-2952, through the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center, where Joyce works, at 916-875-HOPE, and through my sister's house, 916-428-3271. I came to learn about this topic after a colleague told me about Joyce's presentation before the Sacramento Board of Supervisors. Joyce, your presentation was on strangulation. What makes strangulation so dangerous?
Well, thank you, first of all, Kathy, for doing this, you and your team. I really appreciate it. Strangulation has only recently been identified as one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence. Unconscious can occur within seconds and death can occur within minutes. So when a domestic violence perpetrator chokes or strangles their victims, not only is this a felonious assault, but it may be attempted homicide. Strangulation is the ultimate form of power and control over the victim's next breath, having devastating psychological effects that can happen to them or potentially fatal outcome. So it's very, very, very serious. And tonight, our viewers are going to learn a lot more about the consequences, some signs to look for, some symptoms, and what they can do if they know of someone who is in an abusive relationship.
Thank you, Joyce. Don, in my May 17th article, When Would Domestic Violence Turn Fatal?, I quoted former San Diego prosecutor Casey Gwinn, who said, "We've correlated stranglers to mass shootings. We've correlated stranglers to familicide," which is what Sacramento is. There was a familicide case here involving a father who killed his 3 daughters at a Sacramento church. But back to Casey's quote. "We've correlated stranglers to familicide, which is what Sacramento is, where he killed his family. We've correlated stranglers to cop killers, and we've correlated stranglers to men who kill women in America. And the majority of all women in America who are killed have been strangled before they're killed." What have you learned, Don, about men who strangle women over the years of researching this topic and prosecuting these cases?
Well, it used to be that when we assessed the severity of a domestic violence case, we looked at external injuries. You know, how severe were the injuries that we could see? You expected to see bruising, broken bones, things like that. We now know that one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence is strangulation. And oftentimes there can be no external sign or no external injury, yet it can be one of the most dangerous injury inflicted. If you think about the person who's inflicting a strangulation injury and perpetrating that on another human being, that is your life source, your breath. And the person is saying to their victim, I am controlling your breath. You know, when someone uses a weapon, a gun, a knife, something, there is some level of a detachment from that act. But when you are bare hands on the body of another person, controlling whether they take another breath, and you're willing to do that, and you're willing to watch them suffer and watch that harm come to them, that's a different mindset. That's a homicidal mindset. That power and control that the person is exercising is of a different level of violence. The hands-on willingness to show another person, I control if you live or die with my bare hands, has an incredible impact on the victim. And it says a lot about the level of violence that that person is capable of inflicting. So I think we've seen that even though a victim may leave that circumstance with little or no external injury, the fact is that that act is an escalation of violence to the point where they are more susceptible to being killed. And we now know that through the data. And we know that those are the people that become unhinged, that are willing to shoot at officers, that are willing to do other types of violence, not just to their domestic violence victim.
Wow. Joyce, what more can you tell us about the dangers of strangulation?
Yeah, like Don was saying, you know, research has shown stranglers, people who strangle, there's a high percentage of them who are cop killers. They are mass shooters. You know, they have been known to go in and shoot their entire families and then maybe kill themselves. And if you look back through their history, you'll see that, you know, there's a criminal history there, maybe a history of domestic violence, definitely strangulation. You know, and then when you talked at first, a woman who's been strangled one time, she's at 700% greater at risk of being killed. You add a gun to that, a weapon to that, and it's way over 1,000%. You know, victims may look fine when they've been strangled, and they might even say that they're fine, but just underneath the skin, there could be really some severe internal injuries and or delay complications, some internal injuries. And I'm going to talk more about internal injuries. The majority of victims and a lot of surveys have shown that over half of them had no visible signs on the outside. So when a victim is telling maybe law enforcement or an advocate or whoever, I don't need to go to see my healthcare provider, I'm fine, and they don't see any visible injuries, that's not true. There could be some very, very serious stuff going on and even die within the next 72 hours or later on.
Kathy, I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you, Kathy.
Apologies. Don and Joyce, what can people listening today do if they've learned that a friend or relative has been strangled by their partner? I know that this question comes from a reader whose friend did tell her that she was threatened by someone. So can you tell me what people can do?
I would encourage them to reach out to the Family Justice Center, to reach out to Weave, to, if they're not ready to take the step to report to law enforcement, or there isn't a specific incident they want to report to law enforcement, encourage them to at least talk to somebody at a facility like the Family Justice Center to get educated, to get a safety plan, to understand their potential risks, not only for violence, but their health risks if they've had a strangulation incident. I mean, Joyce, you give this kind of advice all the time. I'm going to defer to you on this one.
Yeah, I would first encourage, if it was my friend, I would encourage my friend to seek some medical attention. Let's do that piece first. But come into a program like the Family Justice Center, or if there's one in your area, or the local domestic violence, where they are trained in assessing for strangulation. All of our staff is trained, that we've all had advanced training on assessing for strangulation. So we can get that person the treatment that they need or the support that they need, help them with making a report if that's what they want to do, but just really supporting them, validating them, and making sure that they get medical treatment if needed. And most importantly, out of all things, talk about safety. Safety planning saves lives. Restraining orders don't necessarily do that, but safety planning can really save lives. So we want to talk about the safety for them and their children.
Joyce, I was just going to mention, I was just going to ask you that question, because you always mention it to me when I talk to you. You talk about safety planning. What is a safety plan?
Well, a safety plan is tailored to that person. So it looks different for everybody, and it's not the end all be all. Sometimes people think if you do a safety plan, that's all you need to do. But a safety plan is fluid and it's always changing. So let's say, for example, I'm working with you and you tell me you want to leave this relationship, but you don't want to leave for 3 months until your kids get out of school. So I'm going to talk to you about what can we do? Where are you going to go in 3 months? So I want to find out if you've left before, just kind of brainstorm with them about that piece. And then we're going to talk about, what about the kids? Do you have the legal right to take the kids? So we want to talk about that piece there. And then we're going to talk about how you're going to get there. Do you have the financial means to get there, the transportation? So we'll discuss that with them. And then we're going to talk about, okay, you're going to be in this house for 3 months. What can we do? What can you do to be safe, for you and your children to be safe? And then we can just bring that safety plan down in even more. Like, for example, a code word would work good. If my friend calls and I say, no, I don't have a recipe for pumpkin pie, that could be the code that we've developed to call 911 or to not come over or to come over. You could do that with children. Tell your child, there's no, I forget, just the code word with your kid, like no pumpkin, not tonight. That could be the sign for your child to go to your room. Have an extra bag packed of clothes, put away somewhere safe where no one knows, because victims of domestic violence don't just generally leave and say, bye, I'm out of here. They generally escape, quite often in the middle of the night, with nothing, So if they have an extra bag of clothes that they could put away, or their medication, a Ziploc freezer bag, they could put all of their important documents in it, copies of those, and hide it in a tampon box or somewhere safe like that. So a safety plan is changing. So if someone comes in, we're going to do a safety plan with them. If they get a restraining order, that safety plan will look different. What are you going to do to be safe when the person's being served? What are you going to be safe if you have to go to court? If you have to go to the hospital, let's talk about safety there. Safety for your kids at school. So it's always fluid. It's always changing. And let me just add one more thing. Most people think victims are safe once they leave, and that's not true. It's the most dangerous time. More people are killed in the process of leaving than any other time. So we want to make sure that they have a plan after they get out. What can they do for themselves and their kids? And if anybody wants to know more about safety planning, they can talk with their local domestic violence program or the Family Justice Center. We would be just thrilled to email you some safety plans.
Terrific. For my articles, I did interview Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack, both former prosecutors, and they started a nonprofit called Alliance for Hope International. As part of their work, they run intervention programs for children who live in violent homes and for children who have been sexually abused. I believe the Family Justice Center works with them. Sacramento Family Justice Center works with them on one such intervention program, a camp for kids. And Joyce, can you talk about that program and how it has changed lives?
Yes, we have a program called CATCH. It's our CATCH program, Children and Teens Creating Hope. And underneath that program, we have 3 categories. One is our Camp Hope America, under the Alliance for Hope that Casey created. And then we have a child therapy program, and all these services are free. And then we have sort of a leadership. It's ongoing activities to keep these kids engaged with healthy individuals in their life. So I'll give you an example of our camp this year. We have 2 weeks at a camp up in Truckee, and the kids go for, our first group of kids will go for a week. And we have 20 kids that'll be going that first week. And they just do things like hiking, canoeing. It's all based around hope activities. You know, every night they talk about where they see hope. We actually measure hope in the program. So 30 days before they go to camp, we do an orientation with them and administer what's called the Hope Index Survey. And then when they're in camp, we give them that survey again, and then we do it 30 days after. And the research has shown that kids who go to camp, they have higher hope scores. When they're out of camp and they're not still engaged with other kids and healthy adults, their hope scores go down. So we do monthly activities with them throughout the whole year to keep them engaged. Our second group of kids is going to, this year is a little different. It's all girls who have been maybe at risk for human trafficking or sexual abuse and things like that. So we're real excited about that program. They just get to be kids for a week, you know, and have fun and make new connections. And it's really nice to see the kids when they go on their first year, and we have kids that come back 2, 3, and 4 years until they age out. And when you see them from year 1 to year 4, it's so amazing to see how their lives have transformed. You know, they will be out of prison, you know, and they will become good leaders themselves. And we're actually doing a mentoring program with them. So those who are aging out are going to come back now and be co-coaches, if you will, peer coaches for the other kids.
Wow, Joyce, that's tremendous work, and it's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that with me. Learned a lot there. In my interviews with you, you mentioned that strangulation can cause serious health problems and even death, but that often doctors don't perform the right imaging test to find the physical injuries. Can you and perhaps Dawn talk a bit about why victims need to seek medical care?
Pardon me?
You want to go first or me?
Sure. Well, no, go ahead, and you could talk about the medical.
Okay. So this is really sort of we have seen a gap in service. So what happened here is I went back to this I got this training, and I came back to Sacramento, and I said, oh my gosh, we got to change the way we do services, and we got to change all of our first responders and our healthcare providers, and get the DA office and everybody. And they were all so supportive and on board, and we were able to get them to go through training. Many of them brought a lot of their staff. We brought the training to Sacramento. In the meantime, we brought all of these partners together and created a countywide protocol on strangulation for healthcare providers, all these disciplines: healthcare, law enforcement, 911, advocates, medical, DA's office, etc. And then we thought, okay, these people have to still be trained. You know, you have this protocol, but you still have to be trained on it. So what do we find at the Family Justice Center? A victim comes in, they've disclosed they've been strangled, they need medical attention. And I'm going to just give you an example of someone. She came in, she just came from her doctor, and she was strangled. And she said her voice was really raspy. She was dizzy. We did an assessment with her, a strangulation assessment. And she said the doctor said that your neck is going to be sore for a while. Take a couple Tylenol, and you'll feel better in a few days. Now, not that the doctor did anything wrong. It was the doctor wasn't trained on assessing for this. So we have this notice to medical provider card that we got from the Alliance, and anybody can get those cards. And so what we did is I gave this card to this survivor, and I said, do me a favor, take this back to your healthcare provider and ask them to do a CTA scan, because that really scans like the neck and more. But the person needed to have a scan to see if there was more severe stuff. So she did. She took it back, and they took her. And I said, if they refuse to give the scan, ask them to please put it in your medical record that they refused to give the scan to you. So she went in, and they did the scan, and they found out that she had some serious injuries. And thank God, it's been a game changer for us to pass out these cards. We give them to law enforcement. I think the DA's office has a stack of them, you know, other agencies, because you can have some very serious problems internally and not even know it. So it's real important. Healthcare, the gap here is getting the victim to go to the hospital. That's the gap in service, because it costs money. They're unaware of the fact that California Victims Compensation can cover some of these costs. You know, you still can go in if you have a life-threatening condition, which strangulation is, and be treated, not be refused. So it's just educating them.
Dawn, I'm eager to hear what you have to add.
So some of the internal injuries that you're not going to see externally, you can have damage to the larynx, you can have damage to the esophagus, you can have breathing difficulties. The deprivation of oxygen can cause brain damage. It can cause strokes. It can cause miscarriage. There's a number of serious health consequences. So if you're having difficulty swallowing, some survivors have talked about like feeling like they're swallowing glass afterwards, but yet their neck may look pristine. And we've talked to, in a lot of these trainings, we've heard from medical professionals saying, even at autopsy, somebody who's been killed by strangulation may not necessarily have external injury. We as prosecutors need to follow up because we've also seen the progression of the injury, so that maybe the day of the incident, the person may not have external injuries, but days later, finger patterns, develop. And if we're not in contact and making sure that we're collecting the evidence with photographs, with medical evaluations, that evidence is going to be lost. So those are things that we now know more and are educated about. Interestingly, the legislature has actually recognized this too. There's now a penal code section that's been enacted. It's 13700, where law enforcement, when they know that a strangulation incident has occurred, they're required to give an advisement to the person who has been the subject of that strangulation incident. And included in that advisement is that strangulation can cause serious internal injuries, brain damage, delayed health consequences such as stroke, thyroid issues, miscarriage, and death. And also included in that advisement is that statistically, you are 750% more likely to be killed by your partner if they have strangled you. So it's a wake-up call that now we're recognizing in the law enforcement field, in the medical field, and even legislatively now this awareness is being passed on so that victims are being educated right on scene when they've reported being strangled, to hopefully make sure we get that medical intervention at the earliest possible time. And
before we go, I just wanted to emphasize something that Dawn said earlier. This is the last warning shot. This is what the folks at the Alliance for Hope call this strangulation, the last warning shot. And level. And the next step is likely going to be that someone will try and kill you. So please, if this is happening to you, seek help. I'm going to go now to reader questions. I have a question from Victoria from North Carolina, whose friend was killed in a domestic violence incident. She said no one knew what was going on in the relationship. And so if a friend never says anything about what is going on at home with an abusive male partner, are there other warning signs? Joyce or Dawn?
Yeah, I think if they never say anything, right there is a warning sign right there. I always tell people, support them, validate them, listen to them, believe their story, just don't support the violence. Get them connected to resources. And I'm a firm believer in that you check out the resources that you give someone before you give it to them. And let's see what we can do to hold the person accountable for hurting them. But if a person doesn't say anything that's going on, you can still bring up those conversations in a private setting with your friend. Let them know that you're there for them to support them. And most importantly, talk about their safety. What are they doing to keep themselves safe?
So you think that if people don't talk at all about their relationship, that might be a sign then?
I think it could be a sign. There's definitely other signs, like if they have a controlling behavior, jealousy, at the beginning of a relationship, if someone wants to quickly get involved, like move in with you, these are all red flags. If they have unrealistic expectations of you, they might blame others for the abuse that's happening. they have a history maybe of cruelty to animals or children, or even a history of domestic violence with other people. These are all red flags. I always, I'm a survivor of domestic violence myself from years ago, and I saw the red flags at the beginning, but I didn't act upon them. Now that I'm educated and trained and empowered, I can see the red flags and act upon them sooner. So that's where us as advocates, where we can really work with victims on recognizing those red flags. Most victims of domestic violence do not want to leave these relationships. They just want the abusive behaviors to stop. So what can we do to support them and help them and their kids be safe?
I would also add that sometimes your friend may not talk about violence or abuse, but they may talk about, he's very controlling. He has my location on my phone. He controls when I use my phone. You see them withdrawing from friends and family, spending less time with you. Abusers like to have control over their victim. They want to make sure that they don't have support. So if you see your friend in a new relationship kind of withdrawing, not being the same person, not being able to go out, having to get permission, if you see control over money, if you see threats of violence, threats of or abuse to animals in the relationship, there's a lot of subtle power and control that can happen. If there's demeaning comments, if you're hearing name calling, if you're hearing language that is going to make the victim feel demeaned and worthless, and the abuser is working on that self-worth so that they feel like they're only good enough for someone who's going to hurt them. All those things can be the precursors and red flags that Joyce is talking about before your friend even talks about he laid a hand on me. And often the hand goes from a slap to a hit to a kick to much more violence, use of a weapon. And then at the end of that continuum is the act of strangulation, which is really about trying to control your very breath and life.
Thank you.
And some people might not even recognize it as being abuse or domestic violence. Maybe they were raised in a household where domestic violence was occurring, and so they go right into another one with that same dynamic. So that's what feels familiar to them. But anything learned can be unlearned, so that education piece is really, really important. I know myself, I knew something was going on, but until someone showed me and educated me on the cycle of domestic violence, that dynamics, the different types of abuse, that was such a game changer and an eye opener for me, so it took that advocate, whoever that advocate person is, to do that with me, saying, I'm concerned about your safety. Let's talk about this. Have you ever seen the cycle, where you have this tension, then you have this explosion or violent episode, then there's this honeymoon that really kind of gives the victim, I know for me, I felt like I had the power then during that honeymoon phase, but it does just continue to get worse and worse, and like a funnel cloud. It becomes more severe and often ends up in death, either death of myself, I can't take this no more, I want to kill myself, or the other person, or the spiritual self, without some kind of intervention. And it's really hard to break that cycle.
I have a question from a reader on Facebook, and we got a similar question from someone else here. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that. What if it's been, say, 5 years since you've been strangled? Do you still recommend doing imaging tests or anything like that? Or do you think the relationship could still be violent if they're still in that relationship? Could it still lead to death?
Well, I think if you've been strangled, whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that you should never minimize that. There's always a risk. Now, if it's been 5 years ago, it would be interesting to know what kind of health issues they might have. I didn't know nothing about strangulation when I was being strangled. I didn't know that later on down the line, you could have thyroid disease when you're in your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, or you can have some traumatic brain injury as a result of what happened to you from way back then. So, it would just really depend on her relationship with her healthcare provider, what her health is like now. I think, gosh, I'm on thyroid medicine. I wonder why I'm on thyroid medicine. I do know I was strangled many, many years ago. So, all of those things I would look at with my healthcare provider.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. That's very helpful. What is your approach to working? This is Jessica from Lafayette, California. What is your approach to working with whole families when survivors want the violence to stop, but they want to stay together?
Joyce, you kind of talked about this. This is often the case. And, I think the public has the perception that as district attorneys, our goal is to file a case and put people in prison. And that's really not the goal or intention in every case. When we get cases referred to us, whether or not charges are filed, whether or not a victim wants to cooperate with the prosecution process, we assign them a specially trained domestic violence victim advocate. And we also encourage them to do outreach to agencies like the Family Justice Center and Weave and My Sister's House locally. So we understand and recognize that there's a number of external factors that can weigh on someone's ability and willingness to leave a relationship and their reluctance to be involved in the criminal justice system as a result of it. There are issues and fear about custody. There are issues about financial support. There are issues about safety. And they feel sometimes, victims feel that they are better able to control the violence from within the relationship, and that the fear of the unknown once they get out is scarier to them. So there's a lot of things at play when we look at those cases and we look, is this charge going to make him lose his job? Are they not going to be able to support the family? We have to weigh and balance safety and danger and risk to the community with also knowing what is best for this family. Are children being endangered by this behavior? Was this an isolated incident, or is there a pattern of abuse in the relationship? Is there prior abuse or violence in the background of this person? All those things are going to be weighed in terms of what the appropriate disposition is for a case. We have alternative courts. We have other ways to address the situation, and we don't force domestic violence victims to come and testify in a criminal case if they don't want to. So we work with them and we try to work through them to understand their hesitancy, and sometimes we can prove those cases without their testimony, and we're going to do that if there's public safety at issue. But there are a variety of other ways that at least getting in that system and getting access to resources is the kind of intervention that is the starting point often to at least assessing, wow, this has gotten to a situation where I'm in danger, my children are in danger, and I need help.
Thank you. Joyce, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. The number one question that gets asked to me on a daily basis, and I've been doing this work for 40 and a half years, working with survivors. So I've worked with thousands of survivors, and I'm a survivor myself, is why don't you leave, or why are you just staying? And it's a valid question since it's the number one question, but that shouldn't be the question, because when you ask me, why did I stay, or why don't I just leave, it kind of re-victimizes me. It makes me feel like I'm somehow at fault for the abuse because I can't avoid it. So the question should be is, what can we do for you? How can we support you and your kids? Let's see what we can do to get you safe and get you connected to resources. And let's see what we can do to hold the person accountable. There's many reasons why someone would stay or return. They stay for financial reasons. They stay because they love them. They stay for their children. They guilt, culture, religions. Sometimes it's not about staying or leaving. Sometimes, and quite often, it's about living or dying. Victims quite often feel safer. I know myself, I felt safer if I knew he was in the house and where he was at. When he was out all night or on the street, I didn't know where he was at or what he was up to. I felt like I had some kind of control there. So really getting someone connected to an advocate to educate them, like Dawn was saying, on the dynamics of domestic violence can be such a game changer and an eye opener.
Thank you. I have a question from Regina, who just posted on YouTube, and it's one that actually another reader sent in ahead of the program, and she asked it in a different way, but Regina's question will work too. So how can I help? My daughter's boyfriend admitted that he hit her 3 years ago. She says that he's changed. So there are a lot of people out there who have friends. I have a personal friend who was strangled, right? She woke up on the floor of the kitchen and didn't know how she got there. She couldn't remember a thing, which is often the case with strangulation. People wake up and they don't remember what happened at all. They don't remember any of it. And so these things happen, but people stay. Is there something we can do that will help them and make us feel more secure about their safety?
I would encourage that mom to talk to her daughter about reaching out. Just say, I recognize that you're saying that he's stopped or he's changed, but just give Family Justice Center a call. Let them talk to you about this, because what she may not be sharing with her mom and what she may not realize until someone who's trained like Joyce breaks it down to her is that there's many other things that are probably happening in that relationship where she feels like maybe he didn't strike me again, but there may still be power and control dynamics going on in the relationship. And it's important for her to be educated before making a decision to stay in that relationship or thinking that she's safe in that relationship. Joyce, wouldn't you encourage that?
I do. Again, success doesn't mean getting out of a relationship because her mom wants her to, or we want her to. You know, that's not what success is. Success is safety planning, support, resources. We tell survivors who come through our door, whatever decision they make, if they're going to stay or leave, we're here to support them. And if they need a restraining order if they need a restraining order 6 times, we're going to be here to support them because we know how difficult it is to make those steps. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength to survive these relationships. There's nothing weak about domestic violence victims. They're the strongest people I know. And if she has a daughter who admitted to her that her boyfriend hit her 3 years ago, I am thinking, now, if I was talking to the daughter by myself without the mom around, I might get a little bit of more information about maybe she was called the bitch. Maybe she was called these names. And then it escalated, it crossed over to physical abuse. Now, maybe he's not physically abusing her anymore. You know, maybe the emotional, the psychological abuse is getting worse. Or maybe he really learned and got some insight on the impact of his violence and what it did to his girlfriend, you know, and then maybe he seeks some services.
Thank you. And I did have a victim saying or asking, you know, this happened 14 years ago. He strangled me 14 years ago. I'm sorry. She's been with her partner for 14 years and he strangled her 4 years ago. She says that he's since calmed down. He had a 2-week stint in jail and he also had an injury, a broken ankle. And she thinks that took some of the fight out of him, but does she still need to worry?
Well, like I said earlier, I think you always have to worry if you've been strangled once, you know, because the data shows that if you've been strangled once, you're at 750% chance of getting killed, you know, and if there's a gun involved. Now, we don't know nothing about her, so it'd be interesting to know, you know, what he went to jail for. You know, how did he get his injury? What's he like now? What was he like before the 4 years, that whole 14 years? So we don't know anything really. But if someone chokes you, I would always have concern.
I have an Elk Grove, California resident who says, what steps do you suggest people take? I went from calling the police to filing a restraining order, and during this process, my family was killed. There has to be a safer procedure to be able to get out and keep your family safe. Mm-hmm. That's just devastating. Joyce, John?
Well, first of all, you know, I feel horrible that this happened to this family and to this person. I don't know the story behind it, but my sincere condolences. It sounds like, based on the question, that this person was doing everything right, calling the police, getting a restraining order. You know, I think there's some things that I'm pushing so hard for in our community. I think one of them is creating a high-risk team. I think if we had a team of individuals like law enforcement on the team, maybe someone from the local domestic violence program, a medical provider, probation, the district attorney's office, the Family Justice Center, and we get a referral, let's say, for example, from an agency that says, here's a high-risk case. This person has been arrested before for domestic violence. They have a criminal history. They have a history of weapons. They have a history of strangling their spouse. You know, there's Child Protective Services has been involved. You know, the person was doing something a month ago and was let out. So if we had that information ahead of time, this team can come together and say, okay, let's go see if we can keep this person in jail. Let's pick them up, or if they're in jail, let's see what we can do to keep them in longer. And let's get our advocate that's on our team connected to the victim so they can get connected to resources and support. And I also think that our family courts can do a lot better job when it comes to child visitation. When there is a high-risk domestic violence, where there's gun violence, strangulation, criminal history, there should be no visitation for this person at all. Because this is how children and people get killed, you know. Now, as a survivor of domestic violence, I used to think, oh, he should see his kids. He didn't hurt his kids, you know. Kids want to see him. I feel they need their dad and that kind of stuff. But I didn't know about the dynamics of domestic violence. I didn't know that the risk that my children were being exposed to could possibly get killed, you know. And when a judge just says to you, too, validating that, oh, he has the right to see the kids, even though he strangled me or raped me or beat me and doing this maybe in front of our kids or not in front of our kids, it's still damage to the kids. There should be no visitation at all for those children. The family courts really need to, you know, I hate to say this, but they really need to do a lot better at this, because more children and more families are going to die as a result.
Joyce and I have been out advocating in this area for this very reason. And obviously the recent homicide we had here in Sacramento, where the children were killed, and the visitation supervisor was also killed, where the survivor was doing all the right things, had reached out, had got the restraining order. But what people and the family court needs to understand, and there's kind of two tracks here. It's what we're able to do in the criminal court is one thing, getting a protective order, getting the guns out of the house, making sure that there is an access to firearms to the extent that we can. That can be assisted by the type of high-risk team that Joyce is talking about. But also in the family court track, when someone is willing to strangle, when someone is a subject of a restraining order, that perpetrator is trying to exercise control, coercive control over their victim. If now they lose access to the victim by means of the restraining order, yet the family court gives them access to the one thing the victim loves more than anything, and probably more than herself, the children. So it's insanity to me that someone who is subject to a restraining order, who has a police report for domestic violence, who is in the process of having that litigated, would have access to children. In that scenario, I feel like it should be a presumption that if there's a restraining order, and if the children, if there are children involved in the relationship, that they are at high risk of being victims now that the perpetrator has lost access to the victim herself. And we need to do better in protecting them. And I agree, there needs to be changes, there needs to be advocacy, and we're out there working on ways to change these things. So it's a tragedy, and I'm so sorry to our person who wrote in that this happened. We can try and do all the right things, and sometimes the result that is most tragic happens, and it's devastating, and I can't imagine the pain. But we in this system, we in the community have to do better to protect these people, especially the children involved in these relationships.
And I just add to that too, you know, a restraining order, sometimes people think that is it. You got to go get a restraining order before I can do anything, you know, because of the laws or whatever. But when a woman is in the process of leaving, it's the most dangerous time, because the more control they take in their life, the more out of control their abuser is going to become. And now you're saying, oh, you got to get a restraining order. That just increased that risk thermometer, just made it more. And we also need to continue. One of the things the DA's office and the Family Justice Center is doing in partnership is we're training our 911 dispatchers so they can assess for these high-risk cases. We have 5 questions that they're putting right on their screens, and when they're talking to that domestic violence caller, you know, they're asking these questions. That way they can put it in the CAD call and it can go to law enforcement. Law enforcement will know ahead of time, this is a high-risk case because they answered all of these questions here. And that way it'll save officers' lives and it can save victims' lives. And then the officer can go out there and do a more in-depth assessment based on those questions, a better report for prosecution. It's like a sort of chain, you know. 911's trained, they put it in the CAD call, law enforcement gets that information, they go out, they know what they're going into. With these high risk factors, you know, could save their lives. And like Don said, you know, when anybody dies as a result of violence, in particular our children, or you know, it's just, it's heartbreaking. And we all, I don't know how anybody else would, but you all feel a little, feel like you have a little responsibility in that. We have to do more. We have to ask those questions. Has anybody applied pressure to your neck? That's the main thing. We need to encourage them to document the abuse, observe all those signs and symptoms, do those assessments, and most of all, educate and offer hope to victims.
Thank you. We have less than 10 minutes left. I want to ask just a few more questions. Don, this a reader, Diane from Carmichael, asked, would you consider mandatory ankle bracelets for stalkers? Do we have the technology such that victims could be alerted when the stalker is within a couple miles without the stalker having knowledge of where the victim is?
We do have technology and we do have the ability to use ankle monitors in that situation. I'm not sure how a victim is. I know that law enforcement is notified. I'm not sure how the victim contact works in terms of the logistics, but that is out there and it is a possibility in the appropriate case.
Thank you. Wow, that's terrific to know. I hope that helps someone. How can training for law enforcement in strangulation help dispatchers and officers? How can that help? And Don, I think you mentioned, right, they have cards right there where they can give information to victims. And so that's one way of training them and one way that they can help. But Joyce and Don, are there other ways?
Yes, Joyce, they put together and we collaborated on like a checklist of asking all the right questions in doing an assessment for strangulation so that we're getting better documented police reports, which help us not only to provide the right services to the victim, but also to help document the crime for prosecution. So that's one helpful tool. It also kind of allows, I know even as a prosecutor for over 25 years, I have been educated in the last 5-10 years about strangulation and have a completely different perception of it than I did as a new DA. And I know that that's true in all of our fields. So the education has to be continuing and ongoing so that these officers coming in are now receiving this education so that they know just because you don't see a mark, but when you hear that word that he choked me, he strangled me, I couldn't breathe, or I passed out on the kitchen floor and don't even know how I got there, now they're triggered and understand I need to ask these follow-up questions. So education is critical.
Joyce, you arranged a mass education. Why did you do that?
Because I was on fire when I came back from that training, and I was really upset. I was upset with the way I was doing services. I was surprised that I didn't know, you know, when we first opened our center in 2016, we had 29 reported cases and we weren't even assessing for it. You know, after I went to the training, I came back, oh my gosh, we have to change the way we do our assessments and we have to ask these questions. We have to do more. And now we get, our stats have gone up over 2,500%. You know, every client, every survivor that we talk with, we do the 20 danger assessment that was created by Dr. Jackie Campbell. It has 20 questions on it that helps us to look at the risk factors that's associated with homicide. And then out of that 20 questions, we made a smaller one based on that. It's a validated instrument tool. We took the 5 major ones that Jackie Campbell created also, and we laminated it and we took it all out to law enforcement, 911 dispatchers. And then we brought this training back to Sacramento, put the protocol on. And I tell you, Sacramento is really lucky to have someone like Dawn in the DA's office, because she is doing an amazing job. She is out there educating and talking about strangulation and domestic violence and those high risk factors. So we are so lucky to be able to have a really good district attorney in our community and her team there. So I'm just excited about it. I just feel like we have to do more. So another person doesn't write in here and say, I did everything right and I lost my family. You know, that's not right. We have to do more.
So training works in a variety of ways. It increases the ability to actually see folks and increases their ability to get them the help they need. And help can mean medical help. It can mean a restraining order. It can mean identifying exactly what the injuries were, you know, in that test, so that if someone like Dawn has to prosecute it later, she has all the information she needs in order to make that case. And so that's why it's so important for law enforcement and dispatchers to have the training and the information.
I think we also need to educate, though, like, you know, there's an assembly bill that's out right now, 2790, for healthcare providers. So most victims of domestic violence are not going to call law enforcement. And most of them are not even going to disclose that they were strangled. And that one safe place, and I'm speaking as myself, a survivor, was like when I went to the doctor, at least I knew I felt like the doctor was a safe place for me. Even they didn't have healthcare providers have what's called a mandated reporting law. If they suspect, they have to screen, and if they suspect it, they need to report it to someone. And when I went there, I was in my relationship for 10 years, and I went to the doctor many times and no one reported. And I kind of wanted that burden taken off of me for someone to report, because I wasn't going to call law enforcement. It's sort of like if you're being beat up in your home and the neighbor calls the police and they come out, and that violence stops for a while, you have a little bit of relief. Well, this AB 2790 is on the books right now, where they want to oppose that. They want to take that mandated reporting away from healthcare providers. And if you do that, who's going to report? If no one reports, more people are going to die. So this law says if you were sexually assaulted, or if you were beat up, or you were stabbed, or you were strangled, and you go into an emergency room and you're on your deathbed, they don't have to report, only if a gun's involved. It's crazy. I feel like we're going back in time. So we still have to continue to be that voice for victims.
Thank you for bringing it up, Joyce, because it's a horrible, horrible law. It will lead to loss of life. I don't understand what the motivation is behind it, because the data and the information from people involved in this field is that the doctors reporting helps. It helps the intervention. It saves lives. It's critical. And what they're trying to do is limit mandated reporting to only gunshot wounds. And it doesn't make any sense. It's something, this reporting aspect of that safe haven of the doctor's office, and the trust and the explanation and that first intervention opportunity and education, to take that away, I think is a big step back.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do one question. I have maybe 1.5 minutes for you to answer it. I'm going to throw it to Joyce. What can a victim do if their partner?
Sorry, I don't hear the question.
What can women do, or what can victims do? Because victims can be women, men, or transgender folks. What can victims do if their partner threatens suicide if they leave or break up with them?
Yeah, you know, that happened to me a lot too. And I believed that I was going to be responsible for the death of him if I left. And that's just another means of power and control over another. And that person might commit suicide, but nothing that victim has done is responsible for that act of violence that he did to himself or herself by committing suicide. You know, we've had a case like that, you know, where they used all of those power and control things, like, if you leave, I'm going to kill myself. I can't live without you. And I can tell you, they might not want to live without you, but they can live without you. And that's just another power and control.
And it's a lethality factor. Having that kind of threat of suicide or suicidal ideation by your abuser means that they are much more dangerous.
Thank you. Well, let's see, we'll have to close up shop here. So in closing, if you want to come back and watch this discussion again, it will be posted at sacb.com, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. I want to remind those watching in the Sacramento region that if you or someone you know needs help, please call Weave Inc. at 916-920-2952, the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center, where Joyce works, at 916-875-HOPE, and my sister's house at 916-428-3271. Thank you, Don and Joyce, again for sitting down with me and discussing this important topic.
Thanks for having us.